All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to part 3 of our series. It has been an exciting series that has led us here. If you have been with us throughout the conversation, you know we've been digging into the evolving reality of speech language services in our schools as it is these days. We've talked about how today's speech model is more complex than ever, more layered than ever. We've seen fewer veteran SLPs in our field than ever. We've seen an increasing number of SLPAs, CFYs, and aides supporting our service delivery models. And across the board, caseloads are larger and more complex than we've seen before. And at the same time, we're dealing with real tensions. Referrals are coming at a pace that are hard to keep up with. Caseloads are bloated, more bloated than ever before. And even when students may be ready for dismissal, that process can take a very long time, often because of documentation demands, scheduling challenges, or simply not having a clear path forward. And so we end up in this cycle, right? Referrals keep coming, caseloads keep growing. The system feels reactive, not proactive. So today we're going to talk about putting systems in place to stop the cycle. And I think this was really where in most recent years, very recent, we're hearing this MTSS buzz, right? This is something that schools are trying to put into place to stop the cycle and to be more proactive than reactive. So we're going to talk about how we build a tiered speech language support model that allows us to provide earlier targeted support, giving students what they need sooner and ultimately preventing unnecessary over referrals to our special education, our IEPs. So there's a lot of conversation happening in education right now around MTSS, but speech is being pulled into that conversation, but often it lacks clarity on what meaningful involvement actually looks like and how to do it without simply adding more and more to your workload, right? Which defeats the purpose entirely. So our focus today is to reimagine how speech language services can fit into that tiered framework in a way that protects your time, supports your team, and improves those student outcomes.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, so moving on first, my introduction, welcome. I'm Steph. I work closely with districts across the country that are navigating this new reality of supporting layered speech language staffing models, think more SLPAs, more clinical fellows, more new grads, fewer veteran SLPs. I'm a veteran SLP myself, 18 years of experience in the field. 5 to 6 years working here at Amplio, and I had caseloads myself up until this last school year, worked with in the schools myself. And introducing Becca, I'll move it over to Becca.
Sure. I am Becca Bishop. I am also an SLP. I've been in the field for over 25 years in a variety of different settings. I've been here at Amplio for about 6 years, and I currently work very closely with Stephanie and our other team members who support our district partners. I live in the Seattle area, so I had the privilege of attending ASHA in December when I was here in Seattle, and I was really had a ton of fun going to all the different courses, but there were several courses offered centered around the topic of MTSS interventions, tiered intervention support as it relates to speech and language. One of those was a short course that was headlined by Leslie Sylvan, who I know many of us know and have a great deal of respect for, who's been emerged as a guru in our field related to speech language in the MTSS framework. And she put together this short course that really dived into this topic of, teaming models, what this can look like, what kind of tools and support systems need to be in place for it to be successful, and some clinical rationale for why we want to do this. There's a lot of data to support, as Stephanie mentioned, those proactive rather than reactive and failure-based interventions. We all know early intervention works, and we want to be able to use that with our kiddos in elementary as well. So, yeah. Let's move on to why we're here today. We're talking about this Referral spiral. We all know that referral rates continue to rise at a alarming clip. It's a situation that was happening, for a long time, but it feels like it's really accelerated in recent years with record numbers of kids entering school with presenting concerns related to speech, language, literacy, social communication skills. We know these kids keep coming into the schools at kindergarten, and our already overburdened systems are collapsing, quite frankly, under the weight of it all. So, the truth is that most school teams historically have not seen speech and language concerns as something that general education can help with or address as part of tiered intervention. MTSS teams and frameworks were built to address academic and behavioral concerns. SLPs were often left out of that conversation entirely. But we know as SLPs, and I think many of our colleagues know that often underlying those academic and behavioral concerns are communication needs. And beyond that, we also know that kids can benefit from those early interventions, and we don't need to wait until they fail and their speech and language concerns start impacting academics, to be appropriate for intervention. So, what does this referral spiral that we're all in look like in practice? Teachers and intervention teams are not sure. They're feeling unsure about how to support speech and language needs that they have noticed. They may notice these concerns. They don't have the tools or strategies to address them early on, and they don't want to leave the students without appropriate supports. So what happens? They refer. And, really that's the only system that feels available to them or familiar. Meanwhile, SLPs are already overburdened. They aren't typically resourced or allocated time to spend in tier 1 and tier 2 interventions. Their caseloads are maximized and bloated. And so even though we know that those early interventions can be very appropriate and serve the students best, they don't happen because of the way our systems are set up. So what does happen is that there's no general education support for these kids. We end up with more special education referrals, more evaluations, more IEPs, and suddenly we're dealing with backlogs, over-identification, caseloads that feel impossible to manage. And it's not that everyone's not doing everything that they can. Everyone is. It's just that the system hasn't been built to include speech and language support in general ed in a meaningful way. So unless we change that structure, unless we build real tier 1 and tier 2 pathways for speech and language support, we're going to keep spinning in this referral spiral. And so what we need is a system that's designed to prevent the overload in the first place and not just triage it after the fact. All right, Steph.
Okay. Yeah, so when we think about MTSS in schools, we usually think about academics and behavior first. That's where general education teams' focus has been, right? Mental health, especially, I hear a lot of buzz around behavior. Of course, there's always room for improvement and honestly, MTSS in general is still a work in progress, even in those areas in those schools, right? But when it comes to speech and language, we don't always see those same kinds of supports built into the MTSS process. It's still early. And honestly, that always surprises me a little. Like we've talked about in the most recent webinar about how to manage over referrals, and there's really never a hesitation when it comes to referring students to us for special ed, for speech services. The door to the speech room is always open. Am I right? So why isn't speech and language more naturally part of MTSS on the front end? Well, there are a couple of reasons. First, speech and language services have pretty much always lived inside special education, like a silo. We've got our own caseloads, our own resources, our own processes, and that can make it a little bit harder to connect and collaborate within general education teams. Second, most gen ed teachers, they just don't get much training or honestly even the headspace, the mental headspace to catch speech and language issues earlier. They might notice that a student is struggling to participate, having trouble following directions or not quite keeping up in conversations, But without the right tools or background, it's hard to know that that's a speech language issue or what to do next. And if they do, it's just sped referral, right? Just go straight to old practices. And finally, without that shared ownership, I think, between gen ed and sped, students just often get referred directly for special education evaluations, like I said. It just means that there's more referrals, more assessments, ultimately more IEPs, that siloed process, even if in cases where early intervention inside of MTSS might have been enough to support the student successfully. So this is exactly where Amplio can help schools by giving them the right tools, resources, and framework to bring special speech and language supports into MTSS earlier. We can help equip general education teams, reduce unnecessary referrals, and most importantly, help students get the support that they need sooner to avoid special education referrals later. So moving into, we'd love to hear from you on this one, actually. Feel free to type your answer right into the chat box if you would like. But also know that, we've taken plenty of polls on this one, and we definitely know where a lot of people fall on this. Where does your district currently stand when it comes to tiered speech and language support? And you might find yourself in one of these general categories that we tend to hear. One being, we rely almost entirely on special ed referrals, no real tier 1 or tier 2 options. We also hear we have some tier 1, tier 2 supports, but they're pretty informal, pretty inconsistent. We also hear we're actively trying to build a tiered model, but we're still in the early stages. Or, and this is a great one if it's true, we hear this from some folks, we have a solid framework for tiers 1 through 3 that already includes speech and language. Those are kind of generally some of them that we hear. So share where you are if you'd like, please do. We love hearing where different districts are at. But if you're not typing, that's okay too. Like I said, I've asked this same question in plenty of conversations recently with some of our districts that have reached out. And honestly, most districts tell me they're somewhere in the first 2 buckets. Either they're still relying mostly on special education referrals, or they've started doing tier 1, tier 2 work, but it's not yet consistent or systemized. Like there's an attempt to try to systemize it.
Hey, Steph, someone's saying
Yeah.
the chat is disabled, but they're putting
Oh,
it in the Q&A. So go ahead and put your
thank you.
questions in the
Yeah,
Q&A box if the
perfect.
chat is not working. You can,
Yes,
I'm able to see those questions. And I know, Sarah, you
perfect.
asked, will we get these PowerPoints? We will be sending out the
Yes,
webinar recording after, which includes all the slides. Yes.
yes, thank you so much. And this is why Miss Perry, she did the first 2, but she's in Europe. So thank you though, thank you. Our first, there we go, yeah. I'm looking to see if I can even, yeah, disable or enable all that, but I've got that.
That's okay. The Q&A is
You
working. I'm
can, it's
able to see
working
those questions,
perfect,
those things. So that's
perfect,
great. Okay, so
perfect.
let's move
Great,
on. Are you ready, Steph, to?
yeah.
Okay. Okay. So in terms of, if we know what we have isn't working in a lot of cases, what would it look like if it was working? What should, this tiered intervention support for speech and language look like? So we can talk about this, familiar MTSS pyramid where we've all seen this before. It should feel pretty familiar to all of us. At tier 1, we're talking about universally designed instruction, universally designed learning that is really intended to meet the needs of 80% of students without any further intervention at all. So we know that high quality evidence-based instruction with embedded strategies can exist that even include, supports for speech and language development that classroom teachers are using in their everyday teaching, such as visual supports, some robust vocabulary routines, oral language modeling. These are the strategies that help all kids, including those that are at risk. We also know that we have, these tier two interventions, which are more targeted small group interventions, typically still occurring in the general ed classroom, that are really designed to support, those an additional 10 to 15% of students who need some more focused work on specific language concepts, speech sound development. These are, interventions that are often led by a classroom teacher, a paraprofessional, an SLPA, maybe with oversight from an SLP, if that's the way your MTSS team is currently structured. And then we know we've got kids, about 3 to 5% of our population that are going to need much more intensive intervention at tier three. Depending on how your district is set up, sometimes tier three is outside of special education, occurring as part of a tiered intervention MTSS program. Sometimes tier three is actually considered special education in some districts, where they move kids from tier two to special education. That is the tier three. So what this often looks like is a more intensive direct intervention. The SLP is typically involved at this level for students. Intervention is delivered and or closely supervised by a trained staff member, and a student may or may not, as I said, have an IEP at this level. And so what we know at Amplio is that the solutions that we've designed to support this pyramid can work at all of the levels, and we want to talk to you about that and what it can look like. So what we know is that structured materials are needed at every one of these levels. Built-in data collection is needed in order to offload some of the administrative burden of collecting data at each of these levels, and that if we have the appropriate collaborative tools in place, we can empower teams that include general educators, that include support professionals, that include SLPs and SLPAs, to collaborate on these interventions so that the burden is shared among the team members, and that there's a shared ownership of responsibility for these interventions across general ed and special ed. We also know that if an IEP is the only way a student can access support for speech and language, that's not a good system, that's a bottleneck. And so we need to build in these tiered speech and language supports the right way, where we open the door to earlier intervention, shared responsibility, and better outcomes for the students, which is ultimately always the goal. And also making sure that we're not overburdening SLPs with their special education caseloads so that everyone's workload is more manageable. And I'm going to let Steph go back and talk through what Amplio can do to help with this.
Yeah. Oh, that's where it kind of gets exciting. Because just like Becca said, I mean, depending on the district and even the person that I've spoken to, it has looked different depending on what tier you're in. I've spoken with people where the SLP may or may not be on site when the student is utilizing the platform, and is it depending on what tier they're in, how they're using it. It might be activities that are assigned to that student, and they might not be on the campus when the student is in the platform completing their activities. It's tiered instruction, right? Or it might be something where you're in mixed groups and the students are completing their activities within the platform. It can look different depending on where you are, and that's what's really great. Different educators can have access to the same student profile. That's where it looks really cool. So far we've talked about where many districts are today and why speech language often gets left out of MTSS. So now let's shift into that really exciting part, is how Amplio can help. Because here's the reality. Even if we build these beautiful MTSS frameworks, our SLPs are still drowning in caseload, right? So I know many of you live with this every single day. We have dozens of students, dozens, it's more than dozens, limited time, competing needs, never-ending documentation. And so what Amplio is really designed to do is to help SLPs better manage the caseload they already have, while also freeing up the capacity to support these early preventative MTSS tiers to keep those caseloads from not becoming even more bloated. It's like, like Becca was saying. So Becca is going to walk us through that live demo in just a moment, but before she does, I want to give you kind of a quick preview of what you're going to see and what to listen for as she walks through the platform. So first, how Amplio provides structured content that's aligned to the student's goals and specific skills, which means SLPs aren't spending hours each week prepping materials, reinventing the wheel. And that includes also your SLPAs and those early career staff SLPs as well. Second, how an SLP can literally plan for dozens of students in just minutes, or those mixed groups I was talking about, because the content's organized, goal aligned to skill sets and ready to go. Third, how Amplio automatically tracks the progress during the sessions, giving you that real data that you can actually use to make confident dismissal decisions or adjust therapy as needed. It's those nice, pretty graphs we all like, right? And finally, how the platform allows for real world flexibility. So think those group sessions, students working on different goals simultaneously, those mixed goal areas, which, let's be honest, is how real world therapy looks a lot of the time in our schools. This works working on antonyms, this working on synonyms. You got your R kid right here, and they're all in the same room at the same time, right? So those types of things. So taking a look at our next slide here, you're seeing a visual from one of our TL storybooks. So I held a caseload even this school year, and I've used Amplio for the past 4 years or so with my kids. So this is just one example from our TL storybooks, and I use Tales a ton. We have this just one example of the 10,000 plus materials of content that's built into the Amplio platform. So what's so important here and what makes this different from a lot of other tools is that this content isn't just designed for use by the SLP alone. Amplio's tools are built for true collaboration. So teachers, paraprofessionals, SLPAs, and SLPs can all work together to support student speech and language needs across settings. Okay, so this is really what allows us to extend support just beyond just pull-out services. Okay, so things are assigned by the SLP. So I'm kind of manning and oversee. However, multiple educators can see and be assigned to that student profile. So the content includes built-in support for oral language, speech production, pre-literacy, amongst other things, all aligned to this target skills, grade level expectations. So whether a student is working on articulation, expressive language, vocabulary development, early literacy foundations, the materials are designed to meet one where they are developmentally. And what's equally important is that each educator has full visibility into the student's profile. So data-driven decisions become collaborative, fully visual, transparent across the whole team. Our lead SLPs and our special education administrators will especially like this. Everyone can see where the student is, where they're progressing, and where additional support might be needed. What I've also heard our leads and our special education administrators really appreciate too is just the consistency, not just with the data, but with the session notes and things like that, because things are auto-generated. They are editable, like you can go in and edit, session notes and things like that, but that auto-generation also makes it, there's some uniformity in it as well, that makes it that level of consistency across the whole team. So this makes communication across team members not only easier, but much more actionable and much more consistent, which is really, really nice, really, really nice. Okay, so going on to our next one here. This visual, I think, just gives you a quick look at how Amplio looks, just to kind of give you an idea from both the educator and the student side. I will tell you that there is some flexibility in how I've seen educators utilize this, whether they have a smart board in their room or not, some of those types of things. But this also gives you just a clear picture on what it looks from an educator's perspective from their computer, and then what it looks like from a student's Chromebook, like how it looks from a student's side and from an educator's side. So whether it's an SLP, teacher, paraprofessional logging into their Amplio account, immediately have access to their caseload, student profiles, session plans, progress monitoring, data dashboards, everything they need organized, goal aligned, ready to go. On the student side, students can log in securely using their single sign-on platforms like Clever Link. So access is really simple for both the student and the school, and it's aligned with what the school tends to use. Amplio supports both structured MTSS interventions, broader practice opportunities, even outside that MTSS framework. So like I was saying before about Clever Link, like home independent practice. So my sons themselves use Clever with their home, like IXL, Lexia, all those things. They log on to Clever Link at home to be able to use those different applications at home. Amplio is aligned with those so that it's another application on that home use that they can go in, they can do their practice with games from their home. So that's an extra tool that your students can be able to practice their speech games from home. And you, as the SLP, can see how much they practice from home and be able to pull that data. Again, early dismissal from MTSS, from those tiered interventions if they're practicing from home, right? So again, this not only helps reinforce skills and provide additional data points for progress monitoring, but it also creates consistent practice opportunities across settings, making Amplio a truly scalable tool for MTSS implementation. It supports intervention across all tiers, not just direct services. So ultimately, when students demonstrate consistent mastery across both direct sessions and independent practice, students, SLPs, have stronger data to support sooner dismissal decisions. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. Yeah. Okay. So on to Becca.
Okay, so I am going to take you into the live platform in just a minute, but I want to give you just a preview of what we're going to be looking at, so you can be thinking about how each of these elements supports instruction in a tiered framework. So every piece of Amplio content is paired with skill instruction and practice exercises. So the embedded instructional material is kind of the gold mine in my mind when we're talking about collaborative approach to tiered intervention where the burden is not just on the SLP. So what we have are SLP built instructional materials in here. These were all put together by an SLP and a team of SLPs to think about, like, to provide digital and teaching materials the way an SLP would teach it. So I'm going to show you what a little bit of what that looks like, but what they are, they're these digital instructional materials that an SLP, as Steph mentioned, can assign and or provide guidance to another team member to assign. But anyone who's assigned to the child as an educator on that child's profile can be the one that actually implements this and works with the student. So you can imagine in a pre-literacy tier 2 intervention group, which I'll show you in a little bit, this could look like a classroom teacher or a para who's running small groups and using this instructional material to teach the concepts before they go into practice activities. And so in addition to that, as I mentioned, every student, this is, now we're looking at a student profile, and I'll show you this in a minute in the live platform, but every student can have multiple educators assigned to them. So depending on what your MTSS structure looks like, it could be that the primary educator assigned to the student is the SLP, and they've got their classroom teacher, a para, and perhaps an SLPA also assigned to the student. Every single one of these people has the same access to the same materials for instruction and practice, as well as all of the data in the student profile that is collected when the student interacts with the platform. And so you can see how that supports collaboration and teaming quite well. In addition, these are what some of our data dashboards look like, and I'll show you again with in the live platform in just a sec. But you can see how this supports, that data visibility for MTSS monitoring and intervention, so that, and everyone again who's assigned to the student can have access to these data dashboards to monitor progress across target skills that they're working on. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for just a sec and hop over to another screen so that I can show you what it looks like in real time in the live platform. Okay, now you should be seeing the program library. Yes? Great. Okay. So this is the Amplio platform. This is the educator's view of our program library. When you first log in, as Steph mentioned, we've got different ways you can log in depending on what your school system uses for single sign-on. So if you use ClassLink or Clever, and we are also adding a Google single sign-on as well starting this summer. And so we have a wealth of programs and activities that, as I mentioned, were built by a team of SLPs to address very specific areas of need that come up in elementary school and early secondary for students, whether it's a tiered intervention need that comes up or for IEP goals. So we've got programs that address language needs, speech needs, phonology, narrative development, and we've even got 3 different programs that are in Spanish for students who need intervention in their primary language if their primary language is Spanish. So today, what I want to talk through is a couple different examples of how we can use Amplio program content to address pre-literacy and speech sounds in a tiered intervention approach. So we're going to start by looking at this program Sparkle. In the example or scenario of a tiered intervention group that is working on pre-literacy skills in early elementary. And so in this particular example, I have a group of 5 kids that are working on some early phonemic awareness and phonics skills related to CVCs and short vowels. So in this case, I'm going to navigate into some of the programmatic content that addresses some of those skills. And so when I hop into the appropriate program, I can see a really structured sequential program library that I can work through as an interventionist, regardless of what my training is and my background. So I don't need to be an SLP to be able to use this content, because what I know is that if I as a classroom educator have been provided guidance from my MTSS team members, which may include an SLP, that based on this kid's presenting concerns, this group of kids needs to work through some skills with phoneme blending and segmentation to work on their areas of concern. So I'm now in week 2 of my interventions, and I'm planning a session for some kids working on phoneme segmentation. So what I can do as I'm preparing for this intervention session, as the classroom teacher or a support professional, I can jump into this ready-made instructional content, and I see here that I have a nice decodable story that I can share with the group to provide some shared meaningful context for the work that we're going to do. In this case, it's a really cute little decodable story about Ben and his red bat. And so I can read through, at the start of the intervention session with the kids, this decodable story and provide them with that meaningful context. And then I can jump into some very, you know, um, accessible and easy to work through instructional materials to help me teach this concept to these kids before we start working on some practice exercises. So now these instructional materials will walk you through identifying that, letters have sounds and that words are made up of letters, and those can be broken down into their individual sounds. So words are made up of sounds. We can break down words into their sounds. So we can work through cat as a word and the phonemes that make up that word, and we can even listen to them together or practice saying them. And then we can do some practice activities as a group together and listen to the words
Sun.
and think about the sounds that make up that word. You can and then go in and do some reinforcement of that activity and listen to each of the sounds. And then we can practice as much as these kids need with some additional examples like cat, hat, and rat. And when I'm satisfied that the kids are getting this concept and they're ready to do some practice, I can go in and assign this activity really easy to my pre-literacy group with just 2 clicks of a button. And now the instruction and the practice activities are going to be assigned to those kids with just 2 clicks. And so now I'm all ready to work with this group with this activity. If I want to preview what some of those exercises might look like, this is what would pop up during a practice activity with the students from the educator device. Or as Stephanie mentioned, if the students are logging in through Clever, ClassLink, or Google on their own device, this is the screen that they would see on their device as well. So you can go through these different practice activities, and if I need to, because the kids are having difficulty, I can go back to my skill instruction right here. So you can see when I'm looking for the number of sounds in the word hit, I'm going to click 3, and you can see the reinforcement that they'll get if they're working on their own devices. And if I continue, I can show you what it looks like if they select the wrong one. They're going to get an oops, not quite, and an opportunity to try it again. And so again, here's a place where they would get a little reminder, and then I could also hop back to the skill instruction if I wanted to. So that's an example of, the instructional content and the practice exercises that I might address, a pre-literacy tier 2 intervention group with. Likewise, we can really do that with any of the Amplio content. When I was at ASHA in December, I went to a short course. I think I mentioned that Leslie Sylvan had organized, and two of the contributing authors to that short course were some SLP leads from San Diego Unified School District. And if you guys don't know what's happening at San Diego Unified and you're interested in what this really looks like when it's done well, I would encourage you to Google, and San Diego Unified and the SLP leads that put the program together for Tier 2 intervention for speech sound production there are Jennifer Tapp Richard and Claudia Dunaway. They've published a few articles, and also you can find some information online about the program that they have in place at San Diego Unified. They're a large urban district, and so they have a huge speech team. So what they've been able to do is create leads for each area, like focus area of need. So they have a lead that is just for speech sound development, and another lead that works on other areas of language. And they've put these tiered intervention programs in place, which are incredibly impressive. So I highly encourage you to look into that if you want some real examples of how school districts are doing this. But it got me excited about how Amplio can support that model when I was listening to kind of what they had put together. And so what they have done is they set up these speech intervention classes that are all done at tier 2. And so the kids are not on IEPs, but they are receiving targeted support in a tier 2 model for speech sound production, whether it's single sounds or multiple sounds as well. And so in this scenario, you can imagine a group of kids that are working together on velar sound production. And so when you go into, if you navigate down to the appropriate skills that you're going to be targeting for an individual session, you can see here that we've got a wealth of stimuli to work on words at the 1-syllable, 2-syllable, or 3-syllable level, depending on what's appropriate for your kids. And just like we had with the pre-literacy content, we've got skill instruction that can be used by an SLP, an SLPA, or other support professionals to help kids develop these skills even before they hit IEPs and need specialized intervention. So again, all of this stuff was put together by SLPs, and it's got really nice tips and tricks for placement cues, some ideas for cueing and prompting those sounds for each individual sounds. In addition, we've got these really nice visuals for placement with additional, cues for placement as well. And so you can imagine working through a lot of this content as, let's say an SLP has assigned these activities for the student, and another support professional, with some training can work through this content with the students and provide appropriate support as well. So I wanted to also show you what the practice activities look like for expressive, especially articulation activities. What happens when we're doing these practice exercises for students with articulation is we have this tap to speak button in here, which will capture and record the student response. And so this is also something that's really nice and provides great data and visibility to team members who are collaborating on these kids. So I'm going to show you how this works. Cage. So now that recording is captured into the student profile, and I'm going to show you in a minute where you can find that as the SLP if you're reviewing some activities that have been done when you weren't present with the student and you want to review that for tracking the data and understanding what's going on with that kiddo. So I'm going to go out of here now and show you where all of that data lands. So we're going to go into Aiden's student profile. And in here now, I'm back in the student profile. You saw a preview of this before in our slides. What you see here, as I showed you before, is all the educators that are associated with the student, whether they're primary or secondary. I also see all of the activities that have been assigned to the student in the past, whether or not that skill instruction has been reviewed with the student, the progress they've made through the set of exercises that have been assigned, and what their accuracy score, as well as support levels have looked like. I can also see here whether or not that student has been assigned these activities for independent practice or is really just working on them in structured supervised intervention at this point. In addition, if I want to jump into any of these individual exercises, I can see additional information about what the student has done with that particular set of stimuli. And this is where I would see the recording and I can play it back. So you can imagine lots of use cases for this where you're, reviewing this and you want to, talk with the team together about how the students' productions are moving along. You can imagine in a parent meeting, you can play this for the parent and show them, okay, this is how the student was producing this sound in November. Here we are in May, and this is what it sounds like now. Even with older kids, I've used these recordings for, some self-monitoring and, their own sort of, listening to and self-judging their own productions when they're ready for that step. So that's where all of the data lands. I am going to also show you from here, we can go into the student report and look over time at what the skill progress looks like over time. You can imagine how useful this becomes when you're doing progress reporting for at the end of an intervention period or grading periods, or even for students on IEPs at their IEP review. At a glance, you get really nice information about whether or not their skills are emerging or approaching mastery. And also, I want to show you one other thing over here where you can look at some overview data of all of the kids that you as the educator are monitoring in terms of the target skills they're working on, the minutes they've been in the system practicing, how many exercises have been completed. And one thing that I personally love is this ability to, at the drop of a hat, I can go down to an individual group and I can ask the system to generate some data for me, either school year to date or for a specific reporting period. I'm going to go ahead and generate a report. I remember when I was carrying a caseload, timing myself one time on progress reports, and it was easily taking me 10 to 15 minutes per kid. And with our bloated caseloads today, you can imagine how much time that takes at reporting periods. And if you're talking about, MTSS interventions, we're often doing these for 8 or 9 weeks at a time, and then we need to make a decision about next steps with the kids. So you can just see in a matter of seconds with a few clicks, I've now taken the entire group of kids I'm working with, and I can see all of the data over the time period that I selected, and their accuracy over the time period, as well as accuracy the last 3 sessions, so I can get more of a snapshot view of what they're doing with each of their individual skills and exercises. So, you can imagine how much, labor you're eliminating when all of this data is readily accessible in the system for you like that. Okay, I'm going to stop there. That was a lot. I went through a lot. And I will go back and find let's see, let's check our Q&A. Has anyone else dropped any questions in?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. Yes, because we did have one question about pre-assessments and any kind of baseline data. If we wanted to address that question, Becca, on what kind of pre-assessments that or as pre-screeners or assessments are available currently
Yeah,
targeted in
that's a
Amplio
great
through
question.
internship.
So,
Mhm.
a few of our programs have built-in screeners that are at the beginning of, and then baseline screeners, and then post assessments that are built into the program structure itself. In addition, for the ones that don't have that built in, we have a wealth of activities that address each of these specific target skills. And so, what a lot of folks will do is they'll use one set of those exercises for their probes or their baseline assessments and pre and post testing, and they'll save those and not use those stimuli for intervention. And then they'll use the other stimuli for their intervention so that they can use those for testing. So that's a couple different ways that we can accommodate that within the platform as well. Great question.
Great. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go back and share my screen so we can keep moving along. I know oh my gosh, we're running right up against
Yes.
time.
So,
Okay.
yeah. So with that caveat, we know we want to value your time. And because this webinar, specifically this MTSS test topic, is hot and we have gone, we're already at time. We want to value our time. We're going to try to wrap it up relatively quickly. If anyone needs to drop, know that we've got the webinar recording. Although it started a few minutes late, I knew I was going to forget, but we've got the gist and the meat of the topic recording, and we will send it your way. If for some reason you need to go, feel free to drop off. We will send it your way after the fact. We will go just a few minutes over time just to wrap this topic up. So feel free to stay on if you are able to, and know that if you do need to go, feel free to reach out to me personally or stay online, and I am more than happy to do a one-on-one with any of you and take you through a more detailed demo with you or your team as you need. We are more than happy to do that with you. So yes, what makes this possible? On to me, I am the next person online here. What makes this possible? So to take a look at this slide. Truly yeah, before we wrap up, I just want to leave you with a couple of real stories here from conversations I've had with some SLPs recently, because I think they really highlight the wide range of realities that exist out there today. So just in a recent conversation, one of my SLPs that I went on site with said, my passion is AAC. And these AAC kids, they need me. If I had to never target another single sound or two sound articulation case again, I'd be perfectly happy. And I get that. For many of us, our true area of expertise is these complex cases, right? Or these kids that really couldn't, that really need our one-on-one, or small groups that really need our specialized expertise. And so our specialized intervention. And so with these huge caseloads, we would love to be able to spend more specialized time with them. And so that's where I think this MTSS idea too is getting a lot of attention, and having a system like Amplio that can help manage more of these mild cases, or getting ahead of some of these cases that could respond to some of these more mild or more simplified cases, maybe could help help get ahead of the game in a sense with some of these more tiered interventions. So there's also many SLPs and districts out there who are actively trying to build these MTSS systems themselves. I want to give them huge credit for that effort to be ahead of the game. They're struggling. They're struggling to come up, and they're still using a lot of paper type interventions that are just, they're struggling with it. We were at a CEC conference in Baltimore in March, Becca and I both were, and we met with these just really great, well-intentioned SLPs who districts are trying to put up together these semi-structured MTSS systems. And so these SLPs, phenomenal. They've attempted to create these processes where they're handing off these things to paraprofessionals, these paper pencil materials, data trackers, and they're like, here you go. To use in the classrooms, and eventually they hand those back to the SLPs for progress monitoring. A good start, a really good start. And doing this before a special education referral. So these SLPs are super excited about it. They're like, great, I'm handing it off, it's off my plate. And it's helping, it's better than nothing, right? But when we talk to them about a possibility of using a digital tool to simplify, streamline, fully integrate that, I mean, they're lighting up with the idea, right? It's like, whoa, we could eliminate this paper pencil stuff, like the shuffling of all this, absolutely appealing. So that's really the heart of what Amplio is offering. meeting districts wherever they are, whether they're just beginning to build out MTSS or they're already attempting to run a strong program, but they're struggling with the how-to. We're offering a more scalable, efficient way to serve the students more effectively. So if you have any other questions, throw them in the chat there. I think maybe we've got one more. Is the MTSS program a part of a subscription that would be used for caseload management, Becca, was the next question that's thrown out there.
Yeah, so exactly. So the way our subscriptions work is it's per educator. So we based on who on your team needs access to the program, that's how the subscriptions work. And how your team uses that then is completely up to you. So the subscriptions are going to be depending on the number of educators you want to onboard, and that would determine your the number of subscriptions you would need. And then all of it can be used for any application once those educators are onboarded. I hope that answers the question.
Any other questions that you want to pop in the chat? And of course, like I said before, I would more than welcome the opportunity to meet with you individually one-on-one. I hope you'll reach out to me, taking the time to answer your questions personally or just seeing what it would look like for your district individually. And, would be more than welcome to do that with you each individually. I think on the last slide, Becca, is my email personally. I do tend to do a reach out after these webinars just so that I can give you the webinar link so that you have the recording and the slides and all that good jazz, all that good information for you. And that can be an opportunity for us to chat and meet one-on-one. I love hearing and meeting with SLPs individually. Just being an SLP myself with all the background and 18 years of experience, we get to learn a little bit about each other and then learn about you and your district and your school that you're working in. And that's just an opportunity for us to chat a little bit more about the platform and what we do. It's always a good chat. And just because I've used it myself the past 4 years, even this past school year I used it, it's a good opportunity just for us to learn a little bit more about each other and then see what it would look like in your school district. It's always a good opportunity. So with that, I will wrap things up. If you have any more questions, feel free to hang around for another moment or two. If not, be looking for that email and that outreach. And I really, really thank you guys for coming today.
Thank you, everyone. We really enjoyed
Thank
having you.
you.